Life Unscripted podcast with Rosabel, the place where genuine conversations meet inspiring stories, personal growth, and a dash of humor. I'm Rosabel, your host, inviting you to embrace life's unpredictable journey. Celebrate your unique story and find joy in everyday moments. Get comfortable, stay curious, and let's explore together. Unscripted, unapologetic, and unstoppable. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Life Unscripted podcast with Rosabel, where we dive into stories of resilience, transformation, and the extraordinary experience that shaped us. I'm Rosabel Silphil, and today we have a special guest, Mr. Richard Perkins-Shung, right? He's joining us to talk about an incredible memoir titled Spring Flower, originally started by his mother. And I want to make sure that I say it right. Dr. Jean Trenghua Perkins.
Perfect.
Awesome. Richard finished the memoir, which spans generations and continents. And thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you being here in so many ways. Tell me, how's everything going? Tell me.
Yeah, so foremost, thank you so much for having me, Rosabel, on your show. I'm doing okay. The last volume of my mother's memoir came out about, I guess, 18 months or 24 months ago, so I've been relaxing. Yeah.
Oh, wow. So is it like is it like a series of, it's not just one book, right?
Unfortunately, it's not.
Wow.
It turned into a trilogy or a 3-volume memoir.
Is that going to be the last volume?
The last one, last one came out spring of 23, I guess. Yeah, that will be the last. Yeah, the very last.
Oh, wow. So I get your mother's story is truly remarkable. Can we start by discussing what inspired her to begin writing Spring Flower? I want to hear all about that.
Yeah, so we were just talking about her memoir turned into a trilogy, right? She's an ordinary human being, and although everyone has a life-worthy book, a book-worthy, but not everyone would sit down and write about their life, right, dredging up the past. And so for her, an ordinary human being, why bother, let alone a trilogy? And so the impetus for her to finally sit down, this will be back in the 1980s, to sit down and jot down from her memories of her life and stories in her life, was really to honor all the extraordinary people that she had the fortune of encountering, starting from her adoptive American parents who were medical missionaries in China, where she was born.
Oh, wow. That is so. Let's go back to the beginning in a sense. So I understand that there was a devastating flood of 1931, right? It's the Yangtze River, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
that was very, very important in your mom's life. So life. Tell us a bit about that and how it shaped her path.
Yeah, so Yangtze River has flooded hundreds of times, maybe in its history, and so one of the worst floods was 1931, the year my mother was born, and she was born into a pretty poor, impoverished farmer's family. And I mean, they just had a mud hut and dirt floor. And I guess they've already had 6 or 7 children. She was number 7 or number 8. And girls are not valued in that culture. I think women are being discriminated even today in this world, in this country,
Right.
let alone in China at the turn of the century, last century. And so, but she was fortunate, even though the flood had killed about upwards of 4 million people from drowning in starvation and of course, infectious diseases thereafter. She was one of the few that survived, and she was a baby girl, and her biological mother had enough sense not to just leave her on the roadside to die, but looking for milk and food for her. So kudos to her biological mother. And so they heard about these American missionaries setting up refugee camps, and so they actually went across the river. They were on the northern bank, and then I guess my American grandparents built a hospital directly across the river. And so they went there and they saw my American grandparents. And I guess my mother's biological mother begged them to take her in. So my mother was adopted at the age of 1 by these kind-hearted American missionaries.
Wow. That is incredible. And as well, I'm sure your mother had lots of stories to tell you. Do you have a sense of, you spoke about, all the challenges that it was to grow up, being a woman in China. Do you have a sense of how did your mother perhaps manage to defy those societal expectations?
That's a great question, but that's also a very large question. I guess she was too young to understand what what it meant to be given away. Um,
Right.
and even though she had on and off interactions with her biological mother, they were never very close. I mean, she
Oh,
regarded
so she kept in touch with her mom?
I would say fleetingly, a few times here and there and far in between, I guess. But enough that she would recognize her biological mother in the later years of her life. But she regarded her American parents as her real parents, hands down. And so her influence, her surrounding were totally Western.
Okay.
English was technically her first language, and she was surrounded by English-speaking people and attended English-speaking schools. And in those environments, I think, and she understood and she appreciated girls are valued and entitled to education, medicine, healthcare. And then you have to really give credits to these Western missionaries.
Right.
They really helped China raise the awareness, women's rights and girls' rights, right?
So
Around the world.
let me ask you this. So your mother was adopted, right? And then, but she remained in China for a while.
Yes, so then she spent her first, I guess, 1942, first 11 years of her life in China
Okay.
because her American parents were medical missionaries, right? And they operate a hospital in a very rural fishing village, again on the southern banks of Yangtze River. Right? So then she attended school there until World War II. And at the onset of World War II, Japan and America were not at war, right? And until Pearl Harbor in 1940, December 7th or December 8th, 1941. And so 6 or 7 months later, she and her American parents were repatriated to the United States. And so she actually spent about 3 years living in Yonkers, New York, attending schools there, finishing her elementary school in Yonkers and attending junior high school before her American parents took her back to China because they wanted to continue their mission work after World War II.
Oh, wow. And how would you describe your mother's childhood, besides what you told me, and perhaps the relationship with your grandparents?
She she had a rough beginning, but then she lived this idyllic childhood and very happy and being loved and surrounded by people who loved her, her parents, other American missionaries, teachers, and of course there were a lot of people at the hospital who were also Chinese, right? So then they all knew this is Dr. Perkins, Mrs. Perkins, the daughter, right? So and then she had a great time living in New York. She regarded it's otherworldly because all that glitter. So yeah, so she had a wonderful first 18 years. Although she experienced the oppression from Japanese army when Japan invaded China and most part of South
Oh,
Asia, and she understood what it is to be invaded by another country, the prejudice and the oppression.
and did you get a chance to meet your grandparents, the American grandparents?
My American grandfather passed away in 1958, and my American grandmother passed away in 1960, 61, 60, yeah, 61. When they adopted my mother, they were already well into their early 50s, grandfather, and my grandmother was in her late 40s. So they were pretty old. So yeah, so I never had the
The
privilege or
opportunity.
honor of meeting them.
So, did you mention in the book, or it is mentioned in the book, that your mother also had an amazing encounter with Gandhi, correct?
Yes. So on VE Day, I guess on May 8th, 1945, she found herself on a U.S. Battleship en route to Africa because her parents were dead on wanted to go back to China. And the original plan was to enter China from the western border, Burma, I guess Myanmar, right? And so they had to go through Suez Canal, Africa Suez Canal, and then try to go back to China through the western border because Japan hadn't surrendered yet. And so by the time they got to India, the American missionaries there said, you can't go back there. There's still war there. So they ended up spending a year so my grandparents ended up spending a year doing some more mission work. And my mother actually attended the British boarding school in the Himalayas. And so before she went to school, they were living in Mumbai for periods of time, and they saw this man sitting there on one of his passive hunger strikes. And I guess my American grandparents knew the gravity of the situation and understand the purpose of this demonstration. And they took a photo of him. He was
Wow.
surrounded by a lot of people.
And so what happens after that? Did they go back to China?
Yes, so they after spending a year in India, where she really actually enjoyed India, meeting a lot of people, Indian people, and so and then she found herself back at her hometown, 1946, and so my grandparents reopened their hospital, which had been completely trashed by the Japanese soldiers, and so they continued the mission work, but they didn't know they knew that might have happened, but they didn't really know the details that the communist armies were advancing towards southern part of China. That's where they were. And so within 3 years, at the end of the Civil War, communists took over in 1949. And at the time, they managed to stay on. My grandparents managed to stay on for a little longer because the communist government needed the functional hospitals, and they wanted the skilled surgeon. My grandfather was a highly skilled surgeon,
Oh,
so they allowed them to stay, but not for long because Korean War began 1950, which was a proxy war between America and China on
yeah.
Korean Peninsula. That's a war before the Cold War.
And how old was your
My
grandmother? I
mother
mean,
was
your mother,
my
sorry.
mother. Sorry,
Your mother. How old was she?
she was 19 years old.
And she found herself on a turmoil.
Yeah, so essentially overnight, my American grandparents were driven out of China. They had to flee because anti-American fervor was at all-time high. So, but my mother was 300 miles away, a freshman at an English-speaking college, Smith College, actually. It's a sister college of Smith College. And so she couldn't make it back to leave with her parents. So she was trapped in China for then turned out to be 30 years.
30 years trapped. Wow. And when did she begin documenting these experiences?
I guess for the memoir, she began documenting all of this 1980 when she brought me to America and where she
So you
called.
were born in China?
I was born in China, 1960s, in the mid 1960s, I guess. And so 1980, I was a teenager, and my mother brought me to America, where she called home. And I think she had the photographic memory. I mean, ironically, she died of Alzheimer's disease, but she had a photographic memory that she just jotted everything down from her memories for the memoir and in great details. I know she also cheated because her American mother wrote many letters back home to document their mission work and document my mother's progress and so on.
Yes.
But overall, she did remember many, many things.
Wow. And what was the process like for her emotionally? What was it?
Yeah, that's a great question because I didn't know until I took over the project about 10, 11 years ago now, 2014, when she passed away. I think writing the memoir killed her. Um, she fell in depression, clinical depression, about early 1990s. So she had been working with a memoir for about maybe 10, 11 years. And then that depression she managed to survive from, but led to early forms of dementia in late 1990s and early 2000. And then she died about 14 years after that. So
Wow. So did she like how did you became in charge of the project? Did she just basically told you, "Hey, let's tell me about that"?
So, to be honest, I didn't know what I was thinking. And if I had known what I know now, I would never take on this project. And it was 2014, I was visiting her in her nursing home, and I made a foolish promise to her because she had been there for about 10 years and refused to die. And she was fit physically, but she was robbed mentally. Her mind was gone. And she was essentially trapped in this physical cage, slowly rotting away, lack of better word. So I wanted her to go, to be free. And so I said, I have no idea why you're still hanging in there, right? For what? And then I said, oh, maybe it's for your memoir. And so how about I'll finish it for you and you can leave in peace. And she died 3 months later. So as if she had heard me, right? So then I was left holding the bag and wonder what the heck had I just promised her.
Wow.
So it began a 10-year journey for me to fulfill this promise.
Wow. What has been your experience, as far as, promoting the memoir and getting it out there? And can you tell me how was it received? How has it been received?
Very well received. And because the memoir, albeit very long, requires some time to read it. It's an easy read. It contains so much history. And that was one of the two reasons that she decided to sit down because she encountered she was a witness to history during a period of growth in humanity, right, in the 20th century at least. So yeah, she also conceded to me that she was a terrible historian, not even an amateur one. So that she decided to focus on people and just let history sort of percolating in the background, all the atrocities, man-made or
Wow.
disasters. And so, yeah, so it's interesting in the sense that if a person loves history and it's all there, and she was a witness to it, and if it's about various different people that helped her survive, if not thrive, during her lifetime, and some stories are very moving. And that's what, again, starting from her American parents, but included all the people during those 30 years that she was trapped in China. And that will also include my father, so who helped her.
Yes. I was about to ask about your
Yeah.
father. So did your father came with you to America or he stayed in China? How was that?
In 1980, he and my older sister, my sister is about 6 years older than me, they were left behind. So the family were split in
Wow.
half. And we were not reunited until 2004, 3 or 4, so 25 years later.
25 years later. How do you keep in touch? How do you keep in touch?
It got better. My father immigrated first in late 1990s because he recognized my mother wasn't doing very well. And so he came out essentially to take care of my mom and retired early from his post. And so my sister came out later with her son, much later with her son. And so, yeah, but in the beginning it was extremely difficult back in the 1990s. And to answer your question straight on. And
Right.
so we were actually record on these tape cassettes and try to mail it to each other, which would take probably about a month.
Right, because there was no email, there was no phone, there
Sure.
was no.
Exactly.
Wow. Yes. So you had only one sister? One
Yes.
sister.
Yeah.
Okay. And you were about 18, 19 when you came to America.
Was 14.
14.
Turned
How
15.
was it for you what was that like, changing from, the culture? What was it like, for you?
It was shell shocking. I was totally shocked to be brought to America because I had no idea about my mother's past and that she had lived in America. She was adopted by Americans and spoke English most of her life. And of course, I was 14 and it was an awkward age. It was that age where I
Right.
thought I understood everything, except now looking back on, I understood nothing.
You had to leave like friends behind and,
All the friends behind. Just like I was telling you earlier, on May 8th, 1945, she was forced to leave her high school and found herself on a battleship And her parents wanted to take her back to China, man, because they want to serve China as a missionaries. They want their daughters to continue that path, so to speak. But she didn't want. She wanted to stay in Yonkers,
Yes.
and so in a very strange twist of fate, right? I wanted to stay in China. I didn't want to leave. And so
Right.
coming to America effectively ended a lot of my dreams, a lot of my friendships. As soon as the Pan Am flight landed in JFK, my life just
Now,
totally.
do you regret it?
50 years later, almost, I have a good life in America, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. And this is my home now. China, even though I'm still Chinese, and China is not my home,
Right.
I don't regret that now. At the time, I dreaded so much. I think I was suffering from my own depression, but my
Right.
mother didn't care. And also, I didn't have that much time to react because I had to learn English and learn fast. I was going to be
Yes.
enrolled in schools.
Yeah, we share a similar story. I'm also an immigrant, and I came when I was about 19, 20 years of
Okay.
age.
Yeah.
I did not know English, and so I had to learn. And so at first, so again, you're right. After a long time, then you're like, okay, yeah, I'm thankful for what I have here, but it wasn't easy. It wasn't an easy journey. You had to adapt, to another culture. To
The amount of struggle,
Yes,
in addition to language, language is at the top of the list.
yes, exactly. Cultural,
And, right. And
culturally, yeah, probably that's one of the hardest. Yes,
exactly. And then you were too, we were at the age where friendship, friends
yes.
truly matter.
And even family, because I'm sure you have family out there and then you had to leave your father behind right?
Yes, I didn't want to do that. And of course, my mother didn't really want to do that either. She
Right.
thought she would just be repatriated to
Yes.
America. She thought she was American citizen, but she wasn't.
Wow.
And she thought it would just be a matter of months, if not a year or two, and turned out to be 25 years.
What an interesting story. Now, you did mention earlier something about dreams. We all have dreams, but tell me about those dreams that you thought you had and then what happened? I mean, where were those dreams?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So I grew up during Mao's Cultural Revolution, right? So the education system was decimated. Until late 70s, precisely 1978, most Chinese people regard China was liberated 1978, not 1949, as they were claiming, because those 3 decades were atrocious, right? So by 1978, China was trying to rise from its ashes of its own making and try to reinstate all the education system. And I suddenly found myself not too bad in school, especially I was good in literature, writing, history. And so I fancied myself to become a writer, a journalist, an author. And that was so much like my mother. My mother wanted to become a journalist when she was in Yonkers. Of course, her dream was to write in English. My dream was to write in Chinese, right?
Oh, wow.
So as soon as we got to New York City, there was a
Oh. So did you ever go back and try, do you write Chinese now or speak some of the language? Or
well, after we came to the States, we lived in New York City for very briefly before we settled down in Boston, where I attended school. And my mother was a visiting scholar at a Mass General Hospital. And so when we were in New York City for that month or so, my mother was trying to translate everything to Chinese to me. So I still had some person speaking Chinese to me because I didn't understand anything, practically, right? And then once we settled in Boston, my mother stopped speaking Chinese to me. And just if I didn't understand what she was talking about, she would just ignore me until I understood on my own.
Wow.
And so she was very strict and tough on me in terms of learning this new language. So I made my pilgrimage and visited China in 1999, so 20 years later. And when I got off the plane in Shanghai, people picked me up. I didn't know how to speak Chinese. There's
Wow.
nothing, I know a few words, but then nothing came out. And they found so strange talking to me, communicating with me, because they didn't know that would have happened because I left when I was 14.
Right.
Right. And so for the next 20 years, I had to relearn Chinese. And that was important because I had to relearn Chinese culture, Chinese
Yes.
history, Chinese language for this memoir. Because since that 30 years, part of the memoir is in China, right? So, yeah,
So you relearn it.
I relearned it, but
Yeah.
terrible. So I taught chemistry for about 30 years. many students from China, many Asian students anyway, and many of them speak Chinese, and they tell me that my Chinese is terrible.
Oh no. Well, but hey, at least you speak it, so that's good. You're able to communicate, right?
Enough to get by. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how it was my English, back then when I got here. And then now, like, who knows? Maybe better.
Colombia, right? So Colombians speak Spanish. Is there another
Right.
form of Colombian language besides Spanish?
No, just Spanish. Oh, I mean, there are some little areas where they speak native little languages and stuff, but
Right.
nothing, yeah, but
Yeah.
Spanish, yeah, mainly. But then there, of course, there's that every region has a little accent. So when you try to speak English with that accent, that will definitely change. So
Uh,
luckily, where I come from, the northern part of Colombia, the accent is very neutral. So I was able to pick up because there are some areas of the country that their accents in Spanish are so from the area that when they try to speak English, like I could recognize it. Like I know exactly what part of Colombia you are when I hear you speak English like that. And so it's very, very interesting. But having this conversation with you is so enlightening in the sense that it reminds me. I want to say something here because how important is everybody, like you say, has a story, right? And everybody doesn't get the chance to perhaps write it or doesn't have the time and this and that. However, um in your case, you were born in China, right? And you come to the States at age 14. And so there's this expectation where you were born in China, you were educated your first years, you must know how to speak the language, you must learn how to, you go back out there. It happened to me too, and then when you go back, and I also wrote a book, and in my book, there's a chapter that talks about there's a period of my life that I felt in limbo because let me tell you what I mean. I felt like I was born there, but if I go back out there, I didn't feel part of them because now somehow I have a culture gotten some here. But then I'm a newcomer here and I'm not even part of this culture. So I was like in the middle. Did you ever felt that way? Like you were
yeah,
like right here?
I feel exactly the same way.
Yes.
Although my first 20 years, I had my mother's influence. Of course, I was surrounded by my American families, right? So,
Right.
uh, and I was striving to become a all-American teenager, all American everything, right?
Exactly.
And until, like what I said to you in 1999, when I landed in Shanghai, landed back in Shanghai, wait a minute. And then, of course, from that point on, I realized whenever I visited China, they didn't think I'm Chinese. And
Exactly.
and then I also began to realize I'm actually not American either. So it's
Exactly.
like, so I like some of these current phrases like third culture.
Yes.
But for me, for most part of my life, I view like I tell people, I know a little bit of Chinese and I know I can speak English. And so when you tell people you have two, you really actually have
Yes.
zero, right? You're neither. You say I have two cultures, you're neither, right?
But
So it's a real struggle for
it
people
is.
like you and
But
me.
in time, what has happened to me is I have learned to forge my own identity based on both. So it becomes very unique. And for some reason, and I have literally like myself have put a lot of strength into that because that's how I can become happy. Because if I focus on the here, there, I'm not here, not there again, that system, that idea of being kind of like in limbo feels like you have an empty space inside of you, right?
Yes, I think I've felt that way, or I still feel that way mostly. But I think writing this memoir and also talking to people like you, and I've spoken with a few other people with similar experiences,
Yes.
I realize this is probably a new journey for me to find out who I really am. I'm neither 20 years east and 20 years west, right? So now I'm somewhere in between. But like, I love what you just said. If you start to cherish that,
Exactly.
celebrate that difference.
Exactly. You become to love, start to love this person you are because in a way you are half of that and half of that, and perhaps not in the same amount, but you have a little bit of this, and it makes a very rich,
Yes,
unique person. Which that's what I mean. To me, that's very important.
I
But
don't know where I'm at yet, but I'm beginning to at least accept that fact And I think
Yes.
that's a good start, right? So
That is a good start. And so you made a life in America just like I've done, and then you taught chemistry, right?
yeah.
For 30 years, right?
Mhm.
Chemistry, that's a very, I love chemistry. I remember.
Okay, good.
Yeah, yeah. That's one of my favorites because I'm in the medical field now.
Right.
I'm a nurse practitioner,
Yes.
neurologist, so I love everything
I taught
science.
nursing organic chemistry quite a few times.
Yes,
Yes.
yes. I still remember my chemistry teachers in both high school and college and all their quirky little things and their all their let's do a like magicians, like
Yeah.
I don't know
Yes.
what
All the
is, but
reactions. Yes. Uh-huh.
you
Yep.
have something in your pocket and like let's do this and poof. So another question I have for you. So now that you have, wow, taken this, the arduous job to put together your mom's memoir, what comes for you next? I mean, are you gonna write something of your own?
Uh, so after my mother's memoir was completed and out, I made a promise to myself that I would never write a memoir again, anybody's memoir. And
What
but
about your own memoir?
yeah, no, not
No,
now. Recently, in the past 18 months, as I've been doing this book promotion, I've been asked by a lot of people to write short essays. At the beginning,
right,
I hated that process, and then gradually I began to love writing these really short, 5-minute read and just a concise story
right,
stand on its own. And so I've been doing a lot of that. And so in the funniest way, I may compile them into a book, but in the funniest way, I was telling you, I always wanted to be a writer and journalist, right? So now I am actually doing just that because I had to, for my mother's book, eventually I had to retire from teaching chemistry a little earlier than I
right.
had hoped. But
In a way, that dream that you had, somehow it's finding you. It's like, it's one of
half a
those
century
things.
later, yes, but better late than never, right? So
Exactly, exactly. And then talking about your mother's memoir, I mean, is there any particular part that you'll say, okay, this is my favorite. This is kind of like what besides making her a promise, this is something that, yeah, maybe this is another reason why I'm doing this. What is it what is the message?
I think now that it's done, right? I mean, so it was a very difficult process, mentally, physically, emotionally, for me, and then that's how I understood why my mother fell into depression, and I was just a tad bit better than my mother because I knew to call for help. And now that it's done, I look back on it. And now I have a little bit of distance too, right? I realized it was a very redemptive exercise for me. It didn't heal all my problems,
Right,
but at the very least, it started the process for me to heal my past. Much of my past, I believe, I either didn't have time to deal with it at the time, or I just buried them, swept them
right.
underneath the rug. And we all do that. And I just
And
carry this baggage with me. Now I'm trying to shed the baggage one by one.
there is power in storytelling for so many ways. And one of the things, for example, like in my case, journaling, like writing down your thoughts, brainstorming, doing all that, that's an exercise of the mind. That is very liberating. Whether you put it out there to the public or you just kind of keep it to yourself, but I have found that there is a it's an amazing work of the mind that
Yeah.
definitely helps. So I
Yes.
can understand where
I appreciate what you said because my therapist has been telling me this for years that whenever she saw me just sort of wound up, she said, "Why don't you just write it all down? It's not anything you need to publish or mail it to someone, but just for yourself, and then you can then read it and then
Exactly. You can
process."
get it out of your mind. And
Yeah,
sometimes you just can't even toss it, but it's just out. There's something about it, you getting it out. It's like the physical act of just writing it down is somehow your brain interprets like, oh, okay. One thing less, of all
yes,
this heavy
right.
thing that we carry with us for one thing. Now, I haven't asked you this, but you must have a family of your own, perhaps.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
No
And
kids, no children,
no children.
just my spouse, and she's still teaching at the university.
Okay. I'm kind of curious to see what did she think about the memoir. The memoir. Did she thought kind of like you, like what what did you do or?
She hasn't finished it, far from it, except she's Chinese, and so she
Oh, okay.
understood much of the backdrop, at least for the 30 years, the part about 30 years that my mother was living in China. And it was very interesting that she made an observation that my mother was essentially a foreigner in her own birth country because she was raised by these Americans, right, and surrounded by Westerners. And she had very little understanding of Chinese culture, history, and she spoke Chinese with an accent. And then yet she was watching everything that unfolded around her during those 30 years, essentially from American or Westerners' perspective. Well, I thought that was interesting. I was glad that came through because that was how I felt about my mother. And I mean, it took me a while to realize why my mother spoke funnily when she was in China.
That is interesting. It is amazing how, backgrounds how. So think about this, growing in the same country, but raised by a different culture in the same country, and how it shapes you, how it changes how do you, it's amazing.
Yeah, so
Just,
I think it's genetics, but it's really epigenetics, right? It's how we nurture, not necessarily nature. It's how we actually get nurtured by the people who raise us or by the people who surround us.
that is true.
Her world was America and the American world. And she always thought she was American. Even after she brought me to the States in 1980, it took a while for her to realize that she was actually an outsider.
Wow. I was born in Colombia, and then I was there for pretty much, my first, 19 years of age, right? Knew whatever I could get from at the time from news or something about American culture is about it. And sometimes or sometime, when I had gone back, they literally look at me like I'm Americanized or I'm American. It's like it's the weirdest thing, right?
Yes, it is. It
It,
is.
it is because again, you go back to that sense of limbo,
Mhm.
because you quite don't fully feel like you're fully here, but then you're not there. So
Right.
again, so you,
Yeah. No, I mean, for the longest time, I was ignoring all of that. But it's like awakening, right? It's like Matrix, the movie. Once you're awakened from the fact, then there's no going back. And then you just have to
yes,
deal with this. And then again, accepting that you're
accepted.
neither is a
Right.
starting point. Right.
Well, you are right. Like in my case, I feel that I have accepted it, but check it out. I feel like I accepted it comes with a price, right? When I'm kind of like by myself and I'm like here in my environment. But when I have, for example, people visiting me from Colombia or they're around me, I tend to behave a little bit different. Not in a very different way, because it's like some of the things that they do, I don't fully recognize. And then they look at me like, well, you forgot where you grew up? Do you? And like, no, it's not that you forgot. It's just that I now have this other way of seeing things, and we don't even see it like we don't even politically.
Yeah.
I don't think the same way.
Yeah.
Uh, it's totally different. That's one of the things that I'm actually calling to speak about. There's so much to be talked about. You probably, I don't know if you talk about how you felt, for example, like a judge, or if there was anything like, I don't know if should call it racism or some sort of a thing like that. For me, it was, and the reason why I'm mentioning this, because recently I've been called to, somebody got a hold of me and say, hey, you're Hispanic and you're in the medical field. You must have some experience about, what is it like to be Hispanic or a minority in the field? And I'm like, what about it? But again, the question comes to me, is it because I look a certain way, or what does it make you feel that it's hard for me. It's hard for me to be put in a box. I don't know if it's the same thing for you, but it's hard to like, okay, because I must have experienced some, I even forgot how you call it, some kind of a discrimination. That was what she
Yeah.
was saying.
Right.
I don't know. I feel like I've been too busy trying to learn the culture that perhaps there was some discrimination, but I didn't pay much attention to it. I just like been doing my thing. There was some, but again, all this is telling me that everything, it's what we experience, what we make out of it. Let's put it that way. is what we make out of it. Because I bet you have friends or other people that are perhaps immigrants from China. They probably have a different story than yours, and they probably see their circumstances and their life stories are completely different, even though you came from the same country and so on. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Very individual, like circumstantial type.
Yes.
Did you in the memoir, is it in the memoir or is it part of I read it somewhere that talks about not just the culture but also the political changes and views, the difference between America and
Yeah, the two are very different worlds. In some ways, one can kind of understand why China is the way it is because of its 5,000 years of history and just ingrained in their DNA in some ways. America is a relatively much younger country and has always been founded on this principle of democracy and freedom of speech and expression. And remains a beacon on the hill, regardless of what's happening.
Yes.
Remains a beacon on the hill, a shining city on the hill. And that's how my mother regarded America. And she held that image close to her heart for those atrocious 30 years that she was in China. I don't keep track of what's going on in China as much as perhaps I should. And I'm not politically oriented necessarily. And I only have one very basic wish is there will be no war between China and America
Right.
because I will be in trouble as a American. But I think whatever China is doing, they're prospering, they're improving. I just hope they will never go back to 1970s and 60s and 1950s. Chinese people have suffered enough and should have learned their lessons the hardest way possible. And they finally put themselves up by their own bootstraps, right? So
Right.
kudos to them. And for my mother's memoir, I traveled to China many times, right? So I met many Chinese people from all walks of life. They're wonderful human beings. They're funny, smart, just like Americans, just like Hispanic Americans or Chinese
Yes.
Americans or Americans, right? So
Yes.
people are fine, right? And
We
the
are overall.
ideologies are different, that's fine. But people are fine. And so I hope two countries will remain cordial to one another
Yes.
despite the differences in their concepts and ideologies, I guess.
I feel the same way. I'm the same way too. And then that's not just again the whole political social backgrounds and again, but that's another precept of mine that I don't see. I tend not to see nationalities, or I just like to see people. I see human beings, and I think that's also part of what I do in my medical background. I deal with human beings. Yes, it
Every
helps
day.
us exactly helps us here and there, but other than that, I think that's also one of the things that perhaps if we were to talk about, by the way, my book is called The Courage to Succeed, and it's also called A True American Dream. And the reason why I call
Yeah.
it that is because to me, to be able to succeed in a country like this is, for example, I was just telling that to my husband. The idea was not like, I even told him this morning, like, when I came to America, I wasn't like, well, let me see where I can find the nearest Colombian colony. No, I was just literally open. I've been open to meet people from different backgrounds, different countries, different. It has helped me tremendously because at that point, I find myself like sometimes I describe myself as a, how do you call citizen of the world in a sense.
Yeah.
I like that idea a lot better
Yeah.
because that way I feel like I can, I can embrace the differences. And I think if we look hard enough, we have a lot more in common than the opposite, There's a
Yes.
lot that we have more in common.
I have a similar approach as yours. And I think, having said that, I understand people tend to gravitate towards people they know or the language
Exactly.
they speak, right? So, but yet, if we take our approach, your approach or my approach, and just be open-minded, interact with people from all walks of life, from all backgrounds,
Yes.
young America is actually ideal
Yes.
because America
Absolutely.
is a, is a melting pot or
Yes.
toss-all or whatever terminology people use these days. And it provides this instinct environment for you to interact as long
Absolutely.
as
No.
you're open to it.
And I am very thankful. I am so thankful. It starts with that. I was just having a talk with another guest, and we're talking about how being grateful and thankful, it's like the beginning of so many things, because then we can, again, so thankful for the opportunities that this country has offered
Yes.
us to become those things. And life is, I don't know, that's why I call my show Unscripted, because life is unscripted. Like, no matter how much you think you were born and you had this idea of like, this is what I will become, it's the same thing for me. I wanted to be a doctor when I was 5 years old. And then my mother passed away when I was 17. So I was literally getting ready to go to college. I never dreamed that I will be living here in America. It was not something that I woke up and I was like, let me go to America one day and speak a different language. No, no. In fact, it's just hilarious. English as a second language, as you took a second. I was the worst at it. I was like horrible. I was great in everything. English was the worst. I didn't put too much into it. So, oh my goodness. So, Richard, I feel like there's so much more that we need to talk. Maybe we need to do a second episode.
Maybe I enjoy talking to you too.
Yes, yeah. So I really, is there anything else I didn't ask you that you may want to share with the audience that you want to say that about whether it's about you or your mom or the memoir?
I think we covered a lot of
Yeah.
yeah.
That's pretty good. Well, I just want to thank you so much for first, sharing your mother's incredible story. It truly speaks volumes about strength, identity, and the human spirit. I always said that. And to everyone listening, and also thank you so much for sharing a little bit about your own history, your own story. But I want to say to everyone listening, if you'd like to learn more about Richard and Springflower, the memoir, you can also visit the website, right? It's called Yangtze River by the Hudson Bay, or you connect directly on LinkedIn, right? And
Yeah.
any other way that they can connect with
Yeah,
you?
I'm so sorry. So I finally got my acts together and built a website just for the book. So it's called Richard Perkins-Shung, my last name, HSUNG.com, and
Okay.
information will be there.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thank you again so much for tuning into the Life Unscripted with Rosabel. So until next time, keep embracing your remarkable journeys and take care. Thank you, Richard, so very much.
Thank you.